Welcome everyone to Iran Talks and another special episode of the Israeli imposed war on Iran. Today's guests are Vanessa Beeley, independent journalist from Lebanon, and we also have writer and journalist Diego Sequera from Caracas. Welcome to you both. Vanessa, if I can start with you and just take your initial thoughts and perspective on this Israeli waged war and what many believe is a US-backed Israeli waged war on Iran.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been sort of speaking a lot about the Brookings Institute strategy paper from 2009, Which Path to Persia, a New American Strategy for Iran. And if you actually look at that paper in detail, it outlays from 2005 and the Bush administration the methods of bringing us to this point where Israel is effectively waging the war against Iran, certainly initially and ostensibly on behalf of the US, while of course the US is making this war possible. The negotiations, in my opinion, were simply a ploy to enable the US to supply the laser-guided missiles and the weaponry that Israel needed to conduct this war against Iran and to buy time for Israel to prepare for the war, of course, and to push Iran into this corner of, just as they have done, of course, between Israel and Hamas, of Iran being perceived as the unreasonable negotiator in the negotiations in Oman and in Europe. And this, again, is a typical tactic, particularly of Trump, to add aspects to the negotiations that were not considered in the first place, to push the red lines on behalf of the US and Israel while ignoring the red lines that Iran had imposed from the very beginning. So if we look back to 2005 until now, the roadmap has been perfectly clear that we're heading to this war. And regardless of the president who's in power, they've all played a role in bringing us to this point. So you're absolutely correct in saying that the US has the hand behind the battering ram, which is Israel.
Interesting. Diego, if I can switch to you. Vanessa just said that the United States were essentially using the nuclear talks, to buy time and to wage war on Iran. Do you think, by the same token, that they're also, or is the US waiting to get a sense of perhaps any Iranian weakness to join the Israeli war and attack Iran?
No, absolutely. I mean, it kind of gives you the sense, based on the chaotic signals, the speech and the back and forth that Trump has been stating last week, that they're basically, it seems like they're trying to assume they're going to wage in once to finish the job, quote unquote, as in just allowing to go to unleash their rabid dog in advance, to take all the major hits and then come in and also then this way to keep safe the America First narrative, as in less number of casualties or resources spent or whatever, in order to keep the domestic base as close as possible, regardless of what the numbers are basically saying on surveys. I think, I don't remember now which poll was it, but it was a US one recently saying throughout the spectrum, throughout all the parties, the majority don't want this war. And you also see now, there was a tweet this morning, Venezuela time, of course, Western Hemisphere time, by J.D. Vance, also trying to do some acrobatics about justifying precisely getting away from his isolationist stance and justifying the position that Trump is taking regarding the possibility of directly, explicitly engaging in a kinetic way, because of course it's also what is here that it's not already the U.S. involved throughout the whole process, and to reach to this final point, which the call sign basically was the crappy censorship resolution issued by the Atomic Agency and also by the first statements by Grossi, Argentinian Rafael Grossi, another shame for Latin America in this case, and also then afterwards just saying, just yesterday, I think, a post-truth moment saying, no, there wasn't any nuclear weapons or any intent or any process that points out to a nuclear weapon. They actually, based on that 2003 sketchy, unverified incident about the traces of uranium or whatever, which is, I mean, how serendipitous it is. That's precisely 2003, saying the WMD year. So that kind of sets up, this kind of explains how they've been using all this pieces and dramatis personae in order to finally narratively reach this point and justify what's already going on.
J.D. Vance was, of course, a staunch opponent of any war against Iran, as was Trump before they took office. Vanessa, there's been a lot of debate on are the Israelis influencing Trump along with the hawks in Washington, or is it the other way round? Do you see Israel as a proxy of the United States and some Western countries, NATO members perhaps, and there's a fear that they see some kind of threat from Iran? We don't see any threat. Iranians were negotiating, they were in the talks, in the middle of the talks, and then the Israelis struck, perhaps to the advantage of those extremists in Washington and the hawks and the US allies. But my question is, essentially, I guess, do you see the Israelis as a proxy, as a military base for the United States? And they thought that they can start with Gaza and then go to Lebanon and Syria and then just finish off with Iran.
Well, I think initially, I think Robert Kennedy Jr. made it absolutely clear prior to Trump's election in an interview that he gave exactly what Israel represents to the US. First of all, it's a barrier state. It was initially created to prevent the cohesion of Arab states, to prevent the pan-Arabist policy going through in the region and giving Arab states control both of their resources and of their territory, and enabling the unity of the resistance. That's initially one of the main reasons that it was created. But then going forward, of course, it became a military outpost for the US in the region. It provided interference and surveillance. These are Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s words. And of course, also from an economic and trade perspective, it provides an opportunity to prevent the growth of, for example, of trade with Iran, trade with China, trade with Russia in the region, the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's an incredibly important complex to the United States and for its geopolitical agenda. Is Israel a proxy? Well, Chancellor Merz in Germany has made it quite clear that they think it is. They are basically saying that Israel is waging their war against Iran, which is an interesting statement. But I see it more as a beneficial symbiotic partnership between the US and Israel to further both the Zionist agenda, the Zionist movement agenda in the region, but also to provide the ability for the US to secure its supremacy in the region and to effectively force the withdrawal of its competitors, which are Russia, Iran, and China.
Right. And Diego, Iran is enduring one of the most sophisticated and vicious psychological wars in human history. That's what the leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, said today. Would you go along with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I come from a place that we're also familiar with this kind of multi-layered, aggressive kind of psyops also that works not only on the media landscape, but also in tandem from situations that can concretely create from the ground, on the ground. And we have already seen how the proof of these massive networks of collaborators with foreign intelligence services, specifically, of course, not only Mossad, of course, but mostly and specifically Mossad. Also think about something which was more, at that time, was more speculation than now. I think now it's basically confirmed. All these inconsistencies during the indirect talks also affected, for example, the inflation in Iran. it has had also an impact on the livelihood of people just based on expectation. That's psychological warfare there, 101. And also, it's still a multi-layered thing because you can clearly see different kinds of messages. One, and by textbook messages, in the sense that, for example, you have one set of messages that are basically to undermine the cohesion of the people who support the revolution, or to weaken up the people that are more undecided. And then you have also the hypes that also actually are more in agitated form. For example, the way that they're saying that the way the aerial domination, for example, in Iran's skies, that's a very good example. But also bringing, the zombie-like kind of opposition figures. In this case, the Shah, which actually talks exactly the same, by the way, as Maria Corina Machado, which is our own version of the same kind of mannequin that they used in order to just challenge their interests and their agenda. So it's absolutely clearly that that's a major part of the war effort, and also an easier one, and they're actually more effective on that level than on the kinetic one. That's also proven. I mean, they're very good at not only on creating the message, not only beaming with a huge funded structures, all these channels from, based on Riyadh, London, or whatever, in order to undermine slowly but surely and daily the morale of people, be it, and also exploiting the weaknesses, for example, especially livelihood, I think, especially things regarding inflation, salary, and to, of course, point out to the quote-unquote responsibles in this case would be, of course, the political leadership and also the leader of the revolution himself, in order to expect and create the expectations of the other option. And mind you, it's clear enough that this is a regime change war. It has nothing to do with the nuclear enrichment process. It has not with the nuclear fuel cycle. It was always about regime change.
Right. Yeah, that's the many are getting a sense of feeling that as well. Vanessa, hear me out on this one. You have this axis of resistance, and some believe that it's been damaged. But when you look at the facts, take Gaza, for example, 21 months of genocidal war there. They've killed a lot of civilians, no doubt about that. They've reduced the territory, the Palestinian territory, to rubble. But they haven't been able to, the Israeli forces haven't been able to defeat the militant groups there. If anything, according to US intelligence, the militants have doubled in the numbers. That's one. And then you take Lebanon. Yes, they took out the hierarchy there, the political hierarchy, the military commanders of the Lebanese resistance. But when it came to ground combat on the ground, they couldn't advance 10, 20 meters in the face of the Lebanese resistance. Let's take Yemen, for example. They've waged so much attacks on Yemen, bombardments, but still the Houthis, or Ansarullah, control, or the government in Sana'a, they control or they're not letting Israeli affiliated ships dock at Eilat port, for example. Iraq, there was a resistance there, but they stopped attacking because of political reasons. Israel hasn't achieved any of its war goals in any of these arenas against the axis of resistance. It might have been weakened, but they haven't achieved the war goals that they've set. Let's assume Iran, let's say that they achieve their war goals, which Diego says is regime change. How is that going to affect the region, other countries? And what's your points on, what would you say about what I just referenced there with regards to Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and now Iran as well?
I'll start with the actual resistance axis. I find it very interesting that actually since Israel began its aggression on Iran, and therefore its aerial bombardment of Gaza has been severely limited because of the incoming missiles from Iran. We've actually seen the Gaza resistance factions pushing back and actually having far more success in their operations, although they were already successful, but we're seeing an uptick in the success of their operations against the ground forces, the Zionist ground forces inside Gaza, because effectively now the drones are limited, the aerial bombardment is limited, the naval bombardment is ongoing. So what that tells us is that Israel relies upon, just as the US does, upon this blitzkrieg campaign of bombardment of civilian hospitals, schools, refugee tents, the massacre and slaughter of women, children, men, civilians, in order to put pressure upon the resistance. But what they fail to understand, and what the West fails to understand, is the strength of the unity of the people behind the resistance and the understanding of those people of what it means to face an occupying force like Israel for the last 100 years. And so this is a huge underestimation, both by the West and by Israel. And I did notice that Syria was slightly missing from the list. But I would also like to point out that Syria, for the 14 years that it maintained a defense against a regime change war that was waged against it by I don't know how many countries and hundreds of thousands of terrorist proxies, that 14 years hiatus gave the resistance the time to build up their own capacity, to reinforce their ranks, to strengthen their own independent ability to face the enemy. And so whatever our feeling about Syria, I think that's an important factor of what Syria achieved in the region. And it's also worth noting that now under the Al-Qaeda imposed unelected regime in Syria, of course, they're doing nothing to prevent Zionist expansionism. And I had to laugh the other day when there was a rumor on social media that Jolani was going to close the airspace to Israel, which was kind of ridiculous because he has no control over his airspace. Israel has destroyed all of Syria's military capabilities. Back to your question of what will happen if, which I'm sure is not going to happen, if Iran should fall in this final war. If we remember General Wesley Clark in 2001, he was privy to a meeting in which they talked about bringing down 7 countries and finishing off with Iran. Now, also, I would like to mention 2015, an interview with Jolani when he talked about the now unelected president of the Al-Qaeda regime in Syria. When he talked about cutting off the hands of the resistance, with the final agenda being the destabilization of Iran and regime change. So you have to imagine he's a mouthpiece of his handlers, namely the US, Britain, Israel, and Turkey, with the Gulf states also backing him. Then this agenda was back in 2015 in his mind, implanted there by his handlers. So it's clear to us Iran's role in supporting the resistance for decades has been incredibly important. The resistance is now as independent as it is because of Iran's assistance. If Iran were to fall, then the region would be next, Iraq would be next, and Israel would do what it's done in Syria, which is to try and finish off the ability of any of the regional countries to wage war or even defend themselves against Israel at any time in the future. So this, I can't stress enough for the audience the importance of Iran being able to withstand this aggression from Israel and potentially also from the US.
Diego, what do you think? I should point out Syria there, of course, had it not been for the Caesars Act and 14 years of sanctions and unbelievable terrorism, vast terrorism in a country, in an Arab country, and intentionally cut from its rightful natural resources to get the country up and running again. Because you see, Vanessa, people always go to the prisons, this prison system that Bashar had, as if there's no other Arab country in the region that doesn't have any prisons. People forget that Bahrain per capita has one of the biggest prison systems, dungeons. Saudi Arabia has equally very big prisons, systems and dungeons underground. But those are perhaps Shia that are locked up in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, which is why it doesn't get enough the headlines or coverage that it requires. Abu Ghraib was a prison. Guantanamo Bay was a prison. So yes, indeed, Syria did fall because mainly because of the terrorism and the American presence there and the sanctions, unbelievable sanctions. I was in Syria for about a year from 2005, 2006. I saw firsthand how Christians and from so many minorities lived side by side in such with such warmth, and you had that, you sensed that in Syria. Diego, today, unfortunately, another clear indication that Israel deliberately targets civilians and civilian infrastructure, I should add, just as it does in Gaza and as it continues to do in Lebanon and Syria, for that matter. It's now being seen clearly. Just recent strikes on Iran, especially today, bombing the Iranian Red Crescent building in Tehran, blatant violation of international law. Among the other sites that have been hit recently were children's hospitals, including Al Farabi Hospital and other civilian sites, the headquarters of the Islamic Republic of Iran TV and radio stations, IRIB. So do these attacks underscore a constant pattern where Israel is targeting vital civilian institutions as well as neighborhoods?
No, absolutely. It's the Gaza model, like a very wonderful piece, by the way, by Tariq Siri Lamar from a year ago or something. I mean, this Gaza itself has confirmed and expanded the threshold of acceptance, even from an imagination point of view, standpoint, as in how far they can conceivably go regarding international law, regarding public international law, regarding basic human life value and whatnot, and of course being supported and allowed to do it by all the usual suspects, all the same people. It's the same paradigm operating, and I'm going to allow myself to bring us to my region in that sense. As you know, in Venezuela, in the U.S., there's a very aggressive approach to Venezuelan migrants in particular, and that also it's the same manifestation as these people are basically, they have no value at all other than for political moves like chips. It doesn't matter. Also, mind you, that this also is a bipartisan thing. Recently, you also saw that Pete Hegseth, the reality show Secretary of Defense, had already asked their legal teams to review precisely the laws regarding the civilian targets and civilian value, and to loosen up precisely that. And we saw how they also, which is not new, but I mean, it kind of confirms this, how the nature of the attacks they engaged in while they were when they were bombing Yemen, while they were bombing Sana'a. So it's a template that's been expanded, it's a precedent, and of course it has, in that nihilistic, crazy point of view of the Zionist regime, it has the added value of shock, of bringing the shock and awe doctrine and going further on that element, and try to not only to create as much harm as possible, but also to provoke some sort of irrational reaction on behalf of the adversary, in this case, on behalf of the state that's been an objective, in this case Iran. So in order to make them take the wrong call, and to make the wrong call, and to take missteps that also could allow them to exploit other weaknesses. So it has several purposes in this value, and of course it also brings a philosophical question into this. I mean, this is the actual paradigm of humanity right now. If you want to measure where we are as a species, you just got to look to Gaza. That's basically where we are. That's basically what we are at this moment, and where you stand regarding this also describes this current moment.
So, of course, being as quote-unquote successful previously to Iran, of course they were going to do the same thing here, which is depressing and also quite miserable. I might add, because of course this is even beyond post-truth, in the sense that nothing else seems to be true anymore coming from any of these instances. It was already compromised with Gaza, while even collapsed, but now it even goes further, because who are you going to actually believe, at least from the Western multilateral institutions? So at least at some point in time, we hope this also can allow, and that also underscores the importance of Iran, and of Iran prevailing. This should produce at some point the new laws and the new language and the new ways to conceive the human life in itself, rights, etc., etc. So this is a massive juncture, and Iran is at the forefront on this also kind of wide, diffuse contact line that goes even beyond Iran in this case. It's now Iran that's receiving the heat and the pain and the pressure, but it goes beyond this. And so that's why it's, for us, and I think our president here in Venezuela has already said, it's basically also an attack to us in that sense.
Vanessa, I just got this breaking line here, which I think it's not going to surprise many. The Iranian Foreign Minister's office saying that we didn't send any negotiating delegation to the Sultanate of Oman. The Foreign Minister did not leave Tehran, referring to Abbas Araghchi, at the head of a negotiating team. This information, which was reportedly, I suppose, reported by or covered by Reuters, is incorrect. I mean, would Iran negotiate under? Iran didn't want to negotiate under pressure, and now it's not. Would it surprise? It's not probably surprising that it's not going to negotiate under war when bombs are landing on the heads of children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is just insane. This was, again, an attempt by social media, probably Zionist proxies on social media, running this kind of headline to try and show weakness from Iran, because I think in the Supreme Leader's statement just recently, this afternoon, was it this afternoon or yesterday? Sorry, I'm losing track of days now.
Just a few hours ago, yeah.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Iran is not going to negotiate under any coercion. And I think something that he said, which really struck me, is, and I'm paraphrasing, but to believe that Iran is going to surrender, and that means in any way, shape, or form, people are delusional. And again, I'm coming back to the underestimation in the West of the power of the ideology of resistance. And I'm not only talking actually the resistance factions themselves in the region and the revolutionaries in Iran. I'm talking about the general public. When the attacks happened and people flooded onto the streets in Eid Khadir, for example, this was another clear message to the West that whatever you do, the same thing in South Lebanon. I mean, when Israel recently ordered 4 buildings in Dahe, the southern suburb of Beirut, to evacuate, people were on the streets. Actually, like Nasrallah, as the planes were bombing. This is the huge difference between the occupying entity, the Zionist entity, and the resistance axis. The resistance axis has been waging a war of attrition against the Zionist entity for 100 years, which has actually been a very successful war in a sense that the Zionist entity has never been able to relax, nor should it, in my opinion. It's occupying land, it's running an apartheid regime, it's slaughtering Palestinians since 1948 and even before then. It's committing some of, as Diego said, some of the worst crimes we've ever seen against humanity, including rape in the prisons and rape of children, women, men in those prisons, torture off the scale. And when you consider that the people that have been attacked by Israel for these decades they have, to a sense, become, I'm not going to say they've become immune to it, but they've developed a strategy of coping with it. And the Israelis have not got that strategy. This is the first time in history that they are facing residential areas being affected, buildings being shattered over their heads, like they have done to Palestinians and Lebanese and Syrians and Iraqis for decades. And this is a huge strength of the resistance and of the Iranian people. You are a nation that has withstood sanctions, war, instability, both internally and on your borders, and you've survived that, and you've come through strong enough to be able to deal with the kind of aggression that you're now facing that has been planned for decades. And that's an extraordinary testament to the power and the courage of the Iranian people, even the Iranian people who may have aspects of dissent against the supreme leadership, against some of the policies. But when it comes down to it, when it comes down to defending their territorial integrity, their country, their way of life, their coexistence and their very existence, no, they're going to stand behind the armed forces and behind the IRGC.
Indeed, I think that may have backfired on Netanyahu, where we have seen a lot of unity, whereas the enemies of the Islamic Republic perhaps believed otherwise. Diego, how do you see the next few days unfolding with regards to the United States, and how do you see, if there is any conclusion to this war? Will it come in the next few days or weeks, in your opinion?
Well, it's hard to, in a way, I think it's hard to imagine, because also being accurate right now, it's risky. And I hope I'm wrong, especially. But it's hard not to imagine, sadly, the risk of the U.S. actually engaging on the same level as Israel, especially air strikes more than something else. Of course, there's no actual military mobilization. There don't seem to be any sort of boots on the ground right now or something similar. But I think the risk is getting higher and higher, because there's this post by, of course, by Trump, who else, in Truth Social, talking about, describing the situation, how Iran had so wonderful air trackers and whatnot, and now it's completely under Israel dominance, and talking about this as some sort of slam dunk. So it also proves that the neocons have won, and this is what the neocons want, because of course they overlap in so many incestuous ways with the Israeli state. Facing the America Firsters, think about also that tweet or that other post by in Truth Social against Tucker Carlson that also sends a message. So and also the J.D. Vance thing. So I think these are all pretty bad signs of a possible engagement. And mind you, there's another thing that I think we should never lose sight from, is that these strategies are never about winning properly. It's not about mission accomplished in a strict sense of the word. It's about dismantlation, chaos, disintegration, and to make, especially in this case, of course, the Islamic State, impossible to be a viable state anymore. And mind you, this is a state that we can compare in a way to the state that came after the French Revolution, to the states that were built up in Latin America during their independence, and the state of even the 1776 state. This is a model that was created as significant as any other. So it's even a bigger threat in that sense, especially with the social sense it has, and all the basically what Vanessa has been describing about the value of this, of the whole purpose of the existence of Iran and the axis of resistance, of course. And also this also reminds us that regardless of the uranium enrichment and whatnot, it's also all about Palestine. Like Professor Marani has been also stressing a lot and also all these interviews. It also has a lot to do with that. So now it's a question I might ask, is it existential only for Iran or even only for Israel at this point? I don't think so.
Vanessa, I think it's worth noting, and for our audience, that Netanyahu justified this war on the basis of a nuclear threat for Iran. And I think our audience deserve to know that Netanyahu's claims that Israel faces a threat from Iran's nuclear program, not missile, nuclear, that's his justification for waging war. I think it's important to get the facts clear. Netanyahu's claimed in the Israeli Knesset that Iran was 3 to 5 years away from building a nuclear bomb in 1992. So that means Iran would have had one by 1995 to 1997. And then he wrote a book in 1995. This time, he claimed Iran would have the bomb in 5 to 7 years at the most, which would mean 2002. At the latest would be the point. 7 years after that, he told the visiting US congressional delegation that Iran was just 1 to 2 years away from having a nuclear weapon. So that would have been by 2011. Under the first claim, it would have been 1997 at the latest. Under the second claim, it would have been by 2002 at the latest. The third claim, it would have been by 2011 at the latest. A year after that... and then a year after that, in 2012, and some still think this picture is Photoshop, but it's real. He held up a cartoon bomb and a red magic marker to declare that Iran would have a nuclear bomb in less than a year. Of course, again, late 2013, there was no Iranian nuclear weapon. So Benjamin Netanyahu has been making the same claims against Iran's nuclear program since at least 1992, and on Friday, he made exactly the same claim to justify the bombing of Iran. And some Western governments, in particular America and European countries, didn't even condemn the bombing.
No, exactly. I mean, it's one of the longest running gags of false narratives. 30 years of the same narrative, which is known to be false. But again, we've had the history of the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the chemical weapons attacks in Syria, the Benghazi troops raping in Benghazi and so on. So, we know, history tells us that when the US wants to effect a regime change, they create the narratives to manufacture consent in their own publics for that regime change. But we also shouldn't forget that Israel has done this before when it basically bombed the Iraqi nuclear enrichment facility, Osirak, in 1981, Operation Opera, which again was based upon the fact that Saddam Hussein was building a plutonium reactor. So this is a long-running narrative that Israel has based its self-defense or preemptive strike policy upon. But I think what it's very important to remind people of is that Israel is a non-signatory to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. Under Ariel Sharon, it brought in the Samson option, which when Israel faces an existential threat, it has the right to use nuclear weapons against what is perceived by Israel to be the aggressor. So who is the rogue nuclear state in the region? It certainly isn't Iran. It is definitely Israel. And people, should remember that. What the West is saying doesn't surprise me because they will run with the narratives that they're told to run with. We don't have statespeople anymore in the West. We have stenographers, just as media is a stenographer for power. Our politicians and leaders in the West are the same. And they will run with whatever the US or Zionist policy is. I jokingly called the United Kingdom of Israel, and it's not far from the mark.
Right. Diego, final thoughts on that? I mean, you got Iran, which was under the most robust inspection regime by the IAEA. Daily inspections, cameras, all the facilities, you name it. Probably the best, highest quality cooperation with the IAEA, regardless of the Western drafted resolution, which we now know was influenced by Israel thanks to intelligence documents obtained by Iran. A member of the NPT, abided by all the laws, wasn't the signatory that withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. And on the other hand, as Vanessa says, you've got Israel, nuclear weapons, everyone knows that, 300 to 400 nuclear weapons. And if there is a country that has been wiped off the map, it's Palestine, for all the Israeli claims. And no inspections, non-NPT member. So, you know, how's that going to fare out? What are the history books going to say about this one?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, basing on what you were talking already, I think we have a 35-year-old meme with the thing about the nuclear weapons, by the way. And also, in another sense, which is insanely dangerous, it's how abusive, in a way, the IAEA was in that sense, and how it basically became a channel for intel, like you were saying right now. And also, I thought about what happened to Mordecai Vanunu, the whistleblower of the nuclear project in Israel. I mean, talk about what happens to people who actually tell the truth in that state in particular, right? In talking about narratives right now, how much do we actually know the extent of the impact on the occupied territories with such a strong military censorship? And this also tells you something else, which I think it relates precisely.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, looks like we've lost our connection, Vanessa. Any final remarks?
In a PR sense, not in a net.
Oh, hold up. I think we've got a slight technical issue, a glitch, as they say, with Diego. Vanessa is also not with us, so that wraps up. I was going to wrap it up, but unfortunately we couldn't give our guests their final statements. That does wrap up our special coverage of Iran Talks for today. Vanessa. Oh, okay. We got 5 minutes. Vanessa, do you want to make Diego? Do you want to finish off what you were saying, and then I'll give Vanessa the floor to give her final.
Sure.
Statements. Yeah. Sorry, there was a glitch there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. No, I was basically saying shortly that one of the reasons I think they stumbled into this part of attacking Iran is because they were actually losing the narrative now. All these talking points are just baseless and pointless. And I think it was even impacting on a state level, not because of ethical reasons, but because of PR reasons. Mind you, that particular editorial by the Financial Times like a month ago saying the shameful role of the West regarding gas and so forth. So it is an entity based on narrative. It's based on controlling what they say it is. And I think that has been deeply compromised, and that's one of the key reasons why they jumped into attacking Iran right now. That was basically what I was trying to say.
Thank you very much, Diego. Vanessa?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say we've been talking about potentially the worst case scenario, which the US gets involved in the aggression against Iran. And there was an article today in the Washington Post detailing the cost to Israel of maintaining its air defenses around $300 million per night to basically repel the incoming missiles from Iran, and that they'll only endure another, or in total, 12 days. So for me, this is a clear dog whistle to the US to come to the aid of Israel. But of course, what we do need to understand,
Just to be clear, Vanessa, that Washington Post article was referring to 12 days left of stockpiles for these Israeli interceptor missiles, which means
12 days. Yeah, 12 days basically, as far as I remember, of Israel being able to continue repelling Iranian missiles. In other words, their air defense batteries are starting to be what's the word, drenched by the number of missiles incoming. And so therefore they're only going to be able to defend themselves.
I think the stockpile is running out, Vanessa, and which means what they're doing at the moment is they're choosing or prioritizing which targets that they need to shoot down.
Sorry,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but I would also say that the actual air defense batteries themselves, we've seen a number of failures in the last sort of 24, 48 hours, both by the interceptor missiles and by the air defense batteries themselves bursting into flame. So I do also think, I take your point, but I do think that, the point of this narrative is to basically, as I said, dog whistle the US to come to Israel's aid, to defend Israel against the Iranian nuclear state, in inverted commas. But of course, what this would entail, this would put immediately at risk US bases in the region. I think it would also trigger, although you mentioned something about the Iraqi resistance, but they have been putting out statements that if the US gets involved, they will again target the US bases in Iraq. And the entire resistance axis would not leave Iran alone. The Arab Gulf states would be at risk. Hormuz Straits would potentially be shut down. And so therefore the chaos that would be unleashed by the US getting involved would be far more damaging, in my opinion, to the Zionist entity and to the US in the long run. And finally, I just want to send a message to the Iranian people that Iran and the people, the members of the resistance axis, are fighting, as Diego said, for humanity. They're fighting for what is human about humanity. And the forces that are now attacking Iran are attempting in a multitude of ways to destroy what is human in humanity. And so from my perspective as a Westerner in exile, I want to say God bless Iran, God bless the Iranian people and the resistance axis for what you are doing, because you are the only ones doing it.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for your kind words. Thank you, Diego, for your very kind words as well. I'm afraid that wraps up our special coverage on Iran Talks for today. Let me thank our guest, Vanessa Beeley, independent journalist from Lebanon, writer and journalist Diego Sequera from Caracas. Don't forget to subscribe and join our session tomorrow for more expert analysis. Do check out our social media handles for more details. It's same time, same place, but do check them out for further details. And for now, take care, and it's goodbye from me.